Imagine, just for a second, that you are stranded on a small life raft in the middle of the ocean.
Not a great place to be.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
The sun is just absolutely beating down on you. Your lips are completely cracked. Your throat feels like it's, coated in dry sandpaper, and you are slowly, painfully dying of thirst.
Right.
It's like the ultimate cruel irony of that classic ancient mariner's dilemma. You are quite literally floating on top of millions of gallons of water.
Yeah.
It's everywhere you look. It stretches to the horizon in literally every direction. But because of the salt, it is completely fundamentally useless to you.
Exactly. And it's actually worse than useless.
Right. Because if you drink it...
If you drink it, the salt concentration will aggressively draw water out of your own cells to dilute itself.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Drinking that ocean water will actually kill you much faster than drinking nothing at all.
It's a completely terrifying paradox. The very thing you need to survive is abundant, but it's lethal in its natural state.
Yeah. And for most of human history, that barrier, separating the salt from the sea, that was basically an insurmountable wall.
But today, the reality of global water scarcity is intensifying at a rate that is forcing us to tear that wall down.
We kind of don't have a choice anymore.
Right. And understanding how we do this isn't just like a fun science experiment for coastal cities anymore. It is rapidly becoming a critical component of human survival.
Which is exactly why we're digging into it today.
Exactly. And that is our mission for today's deep dive. We're going to explore exactly how humanity is hacking this paradox. We're tracing the epic, thousands of years long evolution of desalination.
From the very beginning.
Right, all the way back to the ancient, desperate survival tricks of early sailors, and following that thread right up to the massive modern technological marvels that are completely reshaping the geography of the planet today.
But we're also going to look at the massive blind spots, because we really have to.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you look at the data comprehensively, you see a much more complicated picture than just, a miracle technology. We have to weigh the incredible heavy economic realities of manufacturing fresh water from scratch.
Yeah, the cost is wild.
It is. We have to look at the debate between building these billion-dollar plants versus the much simpler idea of just conserving the water we already have.
Right.
And crucially, we need to confront the often hidden environmental costs. Like, what actually happens to the ocean when we start treating it like an infinite municipal reservoir?
Right. So, to really understand the scale of the giant industrial plants we see today in places like California or the Middle East, we have to look at why humanity spent literally thousands of years failing to solve this problem on a large scale.
Yeah, the history is fascinating.
So let's travel back. I was looking into the ancient history of this, and I honestly couldn't believe how far back the obsession goes. I mean, we were talking about Aristotle.
Yes. The obsession goes back much further than most people realize. In 350 BC, Aristotle actually recorded something really fascinating in his writings on meteorology.
Okay.
He noted that if you took a finely made wax vessel, like literally a cup made of wax, and submerged it into the ocean and just left it there for long enough, it would eventually fill with potable sweet water.
Okay, a wax cup in the ocean. I need to stop you there because that sounds like straight up magic.
It does sound like magic.
How does a block of wax filter out salt?
Well, it's not magic, obviously, but it is a very primitive demonstration of what we now call a membrane.
Okay.
See, wax is naturally hydrophobic, right? It repels water. But on a microscopic level, if the wax layer is thin enough, or if it has minute imperfections, it acts as a crude barrier.
Wait, so the water sneaks through the imperfections?
Exactly. The water molecules, which are smaller and have different chemical properties, can very, very slowly permeate the wax. Meanwhile, the larger dissolved salt ions are rejected.
Oh, wow.
Now, it was highly inefficient. You'd barely get a sip of water after days of waiting. But it proved a concept, which is that the salt in the water could be mechanically separated without boiling.
That is wild. Just a wax cup bobbing in the ancient sea. And it wasn't just ancient Greece doing this kind of observation, right? Because I saw records from ancient Chinese texts, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Like the classic of mountains and water seas from the Warring States period.
Yes, and later texts from the Eastern Han Dynasty as well. They observed a similar yet distinct phenomenon.
Okay, what do they do?
Well, they noted that bamboo mats, which they used constantly for steaming rice, would develop this thin outer film over time, just from the constant exposure to steam and heat.
Okay.
And the ancients noticed that this specific bamboo film possessed what we now call adsorption and ion exchange functions.
Okay, let's pause there because absorption and ion exchange are like really heavy terms.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this for the listener. Adsorption with a D. How's that different from like a sponge absorbing water with a B?
That is a great question. So, absorption with a B is like your sponge. The water goes entirely into the material, soaking its entire volume.
Right.
But adsorption with a D is a surface-level phenomenon. It means atoms, ions, or molecules gather and basically stick to the outside surface of the material.
Oh, like static electricity making balloons stick to a wall.
Yes, exactly. The bamboo film had chemical properties that caused salt ions to literally stick to its surface, so it trapped the salt while letting the pure water pass by.
Okay, that makes sense. So if they were noticing these things thousands of years ago, wax acting as a primitive membrane, bamboo films trapping salt to the surface, why didn't they just scale it up?
What do you mean?
Like, if I'm an emperor and my city needs water, I'd just say, great, build me a giant wax cup.
Hmm.
But they didn't do that.
No, they didn't.
For thousands of years, this just remained a camping survival hack, a curiosity. Why did it take a literal industrial revolution to make desalination work on land?
Because they hit a brick wall, and that wall was thermodynamics.
Thermodynamics, okay.
Yeah. For thousands of years, our progress was entirely stalled by the sheer physics of water itself. Outside of these tiny, inefficient wax and bamboo tricks, the only reliable way to separate salt from water was thermal.
Boiling it?
Exactly. You boil the seawater, the pure water turns into steam, leaving the heavy salt behind, and you catch the steam and let it condense back into liquid.
Right, distillation.
Yeah.
I mean, we've known how to do that forever. People distill alcohol, they distill perfumes. So why not just distill the ocean for a city?
Because water has a massive heat capacity and an incredibly high latent heat of vaporization.
Wait, pause right there. Latent heat of vaporization.
Yeah.
For the listener who, like me, hasn't taken physics in a solid decade, what does that actually mean in plain English? You're saying that turning water into steam requires fundamentally more energy than just making water hot, right?
Correct.
Why is that state change so energetically violent?
Let's break it down. When you put a pot of water on the stove, the heat energy you apply raises the temperature of the water. That part is relatively straightforward. But when the water hits 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. It doesn't instantly all flash into steam, right? It stays at 100 degrees and boils slowly.
Right, it bubbles away.
That's because liquid water molecules are bound together by relatively strong hydrogen bonds.
Okay.
To force that water to change state, to physically tear those molecules apart from each other so they can float away as a gas, requires a massive disproportionate spike of energy.
Oh, I see.
And that specific spike of energy required to break the bonds and change the state from liquid to gas is the latent heat of vaporization.
Okay, I think I tracked that. So getting it up to the boiling point takes some energy, but actually kicking it over the edge into steam takes an astronomical amount of energy.
Exactly. It takes more than 5 times the amount of energy to turn boiling water into steam than it takes to heat that water from freezing all the way up to boiling.
Wait, really? 5 times?
5 times. So imagine trying to do this in antiquity or the Middle Ages. You couldn't just build a giant wood-fired still to boil the ocean for a city of 50,000 people.
Oh, you'd run out of wood immediately.
You would literally burn down entire forests just to get a few puddles of drinking water. The energy mathematics simply did not work.
Wow.
And that is why, for centuries, desalination was strictly limited to shipboard survival.
Right. Because desperation drives innovation. If you're on a ship, you don't need to supply a whole city. You just need to keep 30 guys from dying today.
Precisely.
And there are some incredible historical accounts of this. One that really stood out to me when I was doing the reading was from 1560.
Oh, the Spanish soldiers.
Yes. Imagine this scene. There was a garrison of about 700 Spanish soldiers.
Yeah.
And they are besieged by the Turkish army on a small island off the coast of Tunisia.
It's a brutal situation.
Totally. They're completely surrounded, their supply lines are cut, they have absolutely no fresh water, and they are facing certain death by dehydration before the enemy even reaches them.
And in that moment of ultimate psychological and physical pressure, the captain in charge manages to fabricate a makeshift still out of whatever equipment they had on the island.
Which is insane.
It really is. We don't have the exact schematics of what he built, but historical records show it worked well enough to produce 40 barrels of fresh water a day.
That's a lot of water for a makeshift camp stove.
Yeah. He essentially boiled the Mediterranean Sea using whatever fuel they had, caught the vapor, and kept his 700 men alive to fight. It's largely considered by historians to be the first major land-based desalination plant.
Born entirely out of battlefield emergency conditions.
Exact.
And once you're out on the open ocean, the need is constant. Sir Richard Hawkins used shipboard distillation in the South Seas in the late 1500s to keep his men alive.
It was a vital skill.
Fast forward a bit, and I found it really fascinating that Thomas Jefferson was absolutely obsessed with this.
Oh, he really was.
Yeah, in the 1780s, Jefferson cataloged all these heat-based methods going back centuries. He actually went so far as to print practical desalination advice, like how to boil seawater and safely catch the steam on the back of U.S. sailing clearance permits.
He wanted every single ship leaving an American port to have the instructions for survival literally printed on their paperwork.
That is so practical. But as you pointed out, these are all tiny, desperate, small-scale survival tactics.
Right.
The shift to providing continuous water for land-based communities only became possible when human civilization fundamentally solved the energy problem.
Exactly. The Industrial Revolution brought the age of steam. Suddenly, we had the mechanical power, we had an advanced understanding of steam thermodynamics.
And ironically, we had a desperate need for highly pure water just to run the massive steam boilers themselves.
Yes, because salt water ruins steam engines incredibly quickly. Plus, the rapid expansion of European colonialism meant military forces were being sent to remote, arid parts of the world where there were no rivers.
Which brings us to a really pivotal moment in the 1860s. Paint this picture in your mind.
Yeah.
You have the U.S. Army stationed on the dry islands of Key West and the dry Tortugas down in Florida.
Right, very strategic locations.
Very vital strategic military outposts, but they practically deserts surrounded by the ocean. They need water, not just a few barrels, but thousands of gallons. So the military purchases 3 massive steam evaporators from an inventor named Alphonse René Lemire de Normandie.
And these aren't the little shipboard kettles or makeshift battlefield stills we saw in the 1500s. These are highly engineered, vertical tube seawater distilling units. Each one of these machines was rated to produce 7,000 gallons of fresh water a day.
7,000. That is the moment everything changes. We start seeing the true shift to land-based systems. We've taken the camping survival hack, scaled it up with industrial steel, and finally bolted it to the ground.
We did, but we were still fighting the exact same physical enemy.
The thermodynamics.
Yes. Boiling water was still an energy nightmare, even with coal-fired steam engines. Whether it was multiple effect distillation where you try to be clever and use the hot steam from one boiling stage to heat the water in the next stage.
Oh, that's smart.
It is. Or multi-stage flash distillation. But you were still fundamentally fighting thermodynamics. You were still paying that massive energy tax to turn liquid into gas.
So we needed a different hack.
We desperately needed a way to separate the salt without ever changing the temperature of the water.
And that takes us into the post-WWII boom and what we can call the membrane revolution. We are leaping from the age of steam engines to the age of microscopic filtration.
A huge leap.
And the catalyst for this shift, at least in the U.S., was an act of Congress, right?
Yes. In 1952, the United States passed the Saline Water Conversion Act. The context here is critical, though.
Right, the droughts.
Yeah, California and the inland western United States were facing severe, crippling water shortages. Agriculture was threatened, city growth was threatened.
So the government steps in.
Right. So the Department of the Interior created the Office of Saline Water. They started pouring massive amounts of federal money into research grants, hiring expert personnel, and setting up experimental land for testing new ideas.
And it actually yielded results. By 1961, after a decade of regional drought pressure, the first U.S. industrial desalination plant opened in Freeport, Texas.
But the massive paradigm shift, the one that truly changed the world, occurred in the 1960s and 70s.
Okay.
The scientific community finally moved away from purely thermal methods towards something entirely different. Reverse osmosis, or RO.
Reverse osmosis. Okay, so RO is the technology that dominates the globe today. But to understand it, we first have to understand regular osmosis.
They do.
Okay, I'm going to need an analogy for this. Because whenever I hear the word osmosis, I just think of like a high school biology textbook and my eyes instantly glaze over.
Fair enough. Let's try this. Think of normal osmosis, like a giant, crowded party in a room that is divided down the middle by a chain link fence.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
On one side of the fence, you have a massive crowd of people packed shoulder to shoulder. On the other side of the fence, the room is completely empty. Naturally, people are going to squeeze through the gaps in the fence to get to the empty side, right? They want to spread out. They want balance.
Certainly nobody wants to be crowded.
In nature, water does the exact same thing. If you have salty water on one side of a semi-permeable membrane and pure water on the other, the pure water will naturally want to flow into the salty side to dilute it and create balance.
Wait, the pure water flows into the salty water?
Yes, that natural flow creates a physical pressure called osmotic pressure.
Okay, I track that. Nature wants balance. The pure water rushes in to dilute the salty water. But we want the exact opposite of that. We want to take the salty water and extract the pure water out of it.
Exactly. So we have to fight nature. We have to reverse the osmosis.
So, using your party analogy, if normal osmosis is the crowd naturally spreading out to the empty spaces, reverse osmosis is like bringing in a giant industrial snowplow and aggressively forcing everyone back into a tiny corner against their will, squishing them together.
That is a perfect analogy.
And that snowplow is mechanical pressure.
Yes, you are applying immense mechanical pressure to the saltwater side, overcoming the natural osmotic pressure, and physically forcing the water molecules through the microscopic gaps in the fence of the membrane, leaving the salt trapped behind.
Okay, so we traded a heat energy problem for a mechanical pressure problem. We stopped trying to boil the water and started trying to squish it through a microscopic sieve.
That's one way to put it, yeah.
And the breakthrough here came in 1965. Dr. Sidney Loeb at UCLA pioneered a successful pilot RO plant in Coalinga, California. And he used a very specific type of fence for his snowplow to push against.
He did.
It was an ultra-thin, aromatic polyamide thin film. What does that actually mean?
It's a marvel of nanoscale engineering. Think of it not as a solid sheet of plastic, but as an incredibly complex microscopic sponge.
Right.
The internal nanoscale mass distribution of that polyamide active layer is engineered so precisely that the pathways are just wide enough for a water molecule, which is H2O, very small, to snake its way through. But the salt, which is dissolved in the form of much larger sodium and chloride ions, simply cannot fit through the molecular gaps.
Okay, so pushing millions of gallons of water through a microscopic sponge has to require an insane amount of physical pressure.
It does.
We traded heat for pressure. But did it actually save us energy? What did the numbers look like?
The energy drop was staggering. Let's look at the historical data. In the 1970s, when reverse osmosis was still relatively new, it required about 20 to 30 kilowatt hours of electrical energy to produce 1 cubic meter of fresh water.
Okay, 20 to 30. That still sounds like a huge mechanical energy cost to run those giant high-pressure pumps.
It was, but here is the critical difference. Because you aren't fighting the massive latent heat of vaporization anymore, because you aren't physically changing the state of the water from liquid to steam, there was an incredibly high ceiling for optimization.
Because it's just mechanical efficiency at that point. You can build better pumps, better pipes, better membranes.
Exactly. You are operating at ambient temperatures, so engineers got to work. Over the next few decades, they developed energy recovery devices that captured the pressure from the waste stream and fed it back into the intake pumps.
Oh, that's clever.
Very clever. They made the membranes thinner and more permeable without losing salt rejection. By 2018, the global average energy intensity for RO had dropped to about 3 kilowatt hours per cubic meter.
Let me make sure I heard that right. It went from 30 kilowatt hours down to 3.
Down to 3.
That is a 90% drop in energy cost. That is staggering.
It is an improvement by a factor of 10, and it made the technology globally scalable.
So we figure out the snowplow method of reverse osmosis, the energy costs absolutely plummet, and suddenly the global landscape completely changes.
Completely.
We have effectively turned the ocean into a giant, unlimited municipal reservoir. The scale of this today is hard to comprehend. As of 2020, global capacity is roughly 97 million cubic meters of fresh water produced every single day.
It's an astronomical volume.
That's over 21,000 operational plants worldwide. You see these massive sprawling installations in Saudi Arabia, Israel, the UAE. There's a plant, I think it's a Ras Al Khair power and desalination plant in Saudi Arabia that produces over 1.4 million cubic meters a day by itself.
When you look at the macro level impact of this, the technological pivot to reverse osmosis has allowed entire nations to completely decouple their economic and population growth from their natural climate.
Wow. Decoupled from the climate.
Yeah. In the Middle East today, the vast majority of all drinking water consumed in places like Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Kuwait comes exclusively from desalination. Without this technology, those modern economies as they exist today would simply not be physically possible.
That is profound. Okay, so the engineering works, and it's getting vastly more efficient. We are quenching the thirst of millions of people in bone-dry climates.
Yes.
But here's where we have to pivot the conversation, because solving our freshwater scarcity creates a dark, incredibly heavy problem on the back end.
The environmental cost.
Exactly. The law of conservation of mass dictates that if you take the salt out of the water, that salt doesn't just cease to exist, it has to go somewhere.
Precisely. And that brings us to the environmental reality of this technology. We were talking about brine and coastal ecosystems.
Right.
This is where the sheer scale of the solution reveals the massive scale of its consequences. To produce 97 million cubic meters of fresh water, these plants have to take in vastly more seawater than that, and immediately, right at the front door, there is an ecological problem with the intake structures.
Right, because you have these giant industrial pipes sucking millions of gallons of ocean water in. I was reading that the EPA heavily regulates these in the U.S. because they can just vacuum up marine life.
They absolutely do.
Fish, plankton, fish eggs, they get sucked in and killed either through the physical stress of the pumps, the heat, or just getting pinned against the filtration screens.
It's a major issue. Now, there are mitigation strategies for the intake. For instance, the plant in Perth, Australia, engineered their intakes to draw water at an incredibly slow speed, just 0.1 meters per second.
Oh, so it's gentle.
Right. That is slow enough that most fish can easily swim against the current and escape. Other plants use beach wells, where they bury the intake pipes deep under the sand, using the beach itself as a giant pre-filter, which protects marine life.
That sounds like a great solution.
It is, but beach wells require specific geology, more energy to pump, and higher capital costs.
Okay, but let's be honest. The intake is just the appetizer of the environmental problem. The main course is the outflow. We just said the world produces around 97 million cubic meters of fresh water a day. To get that, these plants discharge roughly 142 million cubic meters of brine back into the ocean every single day.
And that is a statistic that stops a lot of people in their tracks. The industry produces significantly more waste volume than actual usable product.
Wait, I really want to emphasize this. Every time a plant produces a gallon of drinking water, it is throwing more than a gallon of toxic waste back into the ocean.
Yes. And this isn't just slightly salty water, this is hypersaline brine. It has been stripped of half its water content, meaning the salt concentration is doubled or tripled.
Wow.
This fundamentally changes the physics of the water. It becomes significantly denser and heavier than normal seawater. When it is discharged back into the ocean, it doesn't just mix in, it sinks like a stone to the seafloor.
Okay, so we are essentially laying down a heavy carpet of ultra-salty water on the bottom of the ocean. What does that do to the marine life down there?
If it isn't dispersed properly, it forms a dense hypoxic layer, meaning it is stripped of dissolved oxygen.
So nothing can breathe?
Exactly. It completely suffocates benthic ecosystems. The benthic zone is the ecological region at the lowest level of a body of water, including the sediment surface. The crabs, the seagrass, the bottom-feeding fish, the microorganisms, they simply cannot survive in a suffocating hypersaline environment.
I have to say, it is deeply unnerving. We are literally making the ocean saltier, heavier, and more toxic just to save ourselves on land.
It's a harsh trade-off.
And I say toxic because it's not just salt in that brine, is it?
Yeah.
When you look at the maintenance requirements for these plants, the brine contains a whole cocktail of trace chemicals.
It does. Think back to our snowplow analogy for reverse osmosis. Those microscopic polyimide membranes foul incredibly easily.
Right, they get clogged up.
Exactly. If organic matter or minerals build up on them, the entire plant shuts down. So, to keep the water flowing, operators have to use a constant stream of chemicals in the pretreatment phase.
Like what?
Well, they pump in anti-scaling polymers to prevent calcium from building up. They use biocides like chlorine or ozone to kill bacteria and prevent algae from growing on the membranes. And because the water is highly corrosive, you get heavy metals leaching into the water from the plant's own internal piping.
Oh, geez. So when the plant operators need to shock the system or flush those membranes clean, that chemical-laden wastewater, the chlorine, the polymers, the heavy metals, the ultra-dense salt, often just goes straight out the outflow pipe back into the sea.
Unfortunately, yes.
I'm going to push back on the industry here. If we're dumping chemical-laced hypersaline water back into the ocean, aren't we just treating the sea like a giant rug to sweep our problems under? We are solving our local water crisis by creating a localized marine disaster.
The industry acknowledges this, and they rely heavily on mitigation strategies, primarily dilution. The prevailing theory is The solution to pollution is dilution.
Right.
A common tactic is to co-locate the desalination plant next to an existing coastal power plant. The power plant takes in seawater to cool its generators and discharges massive amounts of warm wastewater.
Okay.
The desalination plant takes its heavy brine, mixes it into the power plant's warm water stream, and discharges the mixture. The hope is that the warm water helps the heavy brine become buoyant enough to mix into the ocean currents rather than sinking to the bottom.
And if they aren't next to a power plant?
Then they use highly engineered multi-branch diffusers. Instead of one giant pipe-dumping brine, they lay hundreds of meters of pipe across the seafloor with dozens of small nozzles pointing upward.
Oh, like a sprinkler system.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It sprays the brine up into the water column under pressure, forcing it to mix rapidly with the surrounding seawater.
But the data shows that this dilution strategy can be incredibly deceptive. It doesn't always work the way it's drawn on the whiteboard.
Exactly. Because the ocean is not a static bathtub. It has complex dynamics. A major, often overlooked issue is seasonal thermoclines.
A thermocline. Explain that for us.
A thermocline is a distinct, invisible layer in a large body of water where the temperature changes more rapidly with depth than it does in the layers above or below.
Okay, I think I follow.
Think of it like a physical barrier made of water temperature. During the summer, the ocean water forms distinct layers. Warm water, heated by the sun, stays on top, and colder, denser water stays below.
And they don't mix easily.
They don't. So when a plant discharges its brine, it might hit this thermocline layer. The temperature barrier can actually trap the concentrated brine, preventing it from sinking normally or dispersing upward.
Wait, so it just floats in the middle?
Right. Instead of mixing, the brine gets sandwiched in the middle of the water column. And then natural ocean currents can grab this trapped layer and carry these toxic hypersaline plumes kilometers away from the discharge site.
Oh my God.
They can travel invisibly and devastate distant marine ecosystems, coral reefs, or kelp forests that no one is even monitoring because everyone thinks the dilution worked perfectly at the outflow pipe.
So we have a massive toxic waste problem that we cannot fully control. And this isn't just an abstract concern for marine biologists writing white papers. This has real-world, immediate consequences for human communities.
It really does.
I was reading about a very recent, highly publicized case in Corpus Christi, Texas. They were planning to build a massive desalination project,
Yeah.
and they just outright canceled it.
Yeah, that made big waves.
Why? Precisely because of these exact environmental controversies. The local community, the fishermen, the environmental groups, they looked at the local bay, they looked at the hypersaline brine, and they pushed back hard.
Because they saw what was coming.
Exactly. They realized that destroying the local ecology to get drinking water was a zero-sum game. And frankly, the financial risks associated with mitigating all that environmental damage made the project too expensive to justify.
And that Corpus Christi case raises the next critical pillar of this conversation. We have to open up the financial ledger.
Right. Let's talk money.
The environmental costs of desalination are demonstrably heavy, but the economic costs are also stark. When a city or a nation is facing a water crisis, they have to run the numbers. They need to compare the sheer cost of manufacturing water from the ocean versus the alternatives, simply using less water or recycling the water they already have.
Okay, let's open the ledger. I saw the historical pricing, and it is true that desalination costs have fallen dramatically.
They have.
Since 1975, as we improve that reverse osmosis efficiency, the cost of producing 1 cubic meter of fresh water dropped from around $1.10 in the year 2000 to approximately $0.41 to 50 cents today.
So it's basically been cut in half over 2 decades.
Right, and the global market is booming. It's currently valued at around $20 billion and is projected to double by 2032. But here's my issue with those numbers. Just because it is cheaper than it used to be doesn't mean it is cheap.
Far from it.
Compared to pumping water out of a lake, it is still astronomically expensive. And the reason for that is the electricity bill.
Energy remains the inescapable driving factor. Even with the incredible 90% drop in energy intensity we discussed earlier, desalination still accounts for roughly 25% of the energy consumed by the entire global water sector.
A quarter of the energy. Wow.
Up to half of the total operational cost of a desalination plant is just paying for the electricity to run those high-pressure pumps.
So this means if the price of oil or natural gas spikes globally, the price of your local drinking water spikes with it.
Precisely. And in regions with limited or fragile energy grids, this is a massive, sometimes unbearable burden. Look at the island nation of Cyprus in the Mediterranean.
Okay, What about them?
They rely heavily on desalination to survive their arid climate. But running those plants accounts for roughly 5% of the entire country's total power consumption.
5%. Just for water.
Yes, 1 out of every 20 watts generated in the nation goes just to pushing water through membranes.
That is insane.
Yeah.
So when a city looks at that ledger, when they see the massive electricity bill and the environmental headaches, they have to look at alternatives, and the math gets very complicated.
It does.
You have wastewater reclamation, which we usually call toilet to tap. It uses the exact same membrane technology, but because treated wastewater is far less saline than ocean water, it requires significantly less mechanical pressure and therefore less energy.
Right, that's a big factor.
You have urban runoff capture, and then you have the most basic, fundamental alternative of all.
Yeah.
Strict conservation. Just use less. Stop watering lawns in the desert.
It seems obvious.
California, for instance, has pushed incredibly strict standards. They are recommending an indoor water use standard of 55 gallons per person per day right now, and they are legally pushing to drop that to just 42 gallons per person by 2030.
The philosophy of conservation is heavily championed by many prominent water experts. Debbie Cook, for example, the former mayor of Huntington Beach.
Right, I read about her.
She argued very forcefully back in 2011 that water-stressed regions should focus almost entirely on conservation and recycling before they ever sign a contract for a massive, energy-intensive desalination plant.
Okay, what was her main argument?
Her argument was primarily economic. Once you build the billion-dollar plant, you are locked into that massive daily energy expenditure for decades. You've committed the taxpayers to an inescapable financial burden.
Okay, I hear Debbie Cook's argument, and it sounds great on paper. Conservation feels like the morally right thing to do. It feels like deciding to finally change the oil in your old car instead of just taking out a loan for a brand new luxury vehicle.
Yeah.
But I am going to play devil's advocate and push back hard on this. Conservation has a floor, doesn't it?
What do you mean by a floor?
I mean, you can only ask people to take shorter showers for so long. You can only rip up so many golf courses. You can only fix so many leaky municipal pipes.
True.
At a certain point, a growing human population living in an arid climate fundamentally needs a specific volume of water to literally survive. If that volume of water simply does not exist in the sky or in the aquifers beneath their feet, no amount of turning off the tap while you brush your teeth is going to save them. You cannot conserve water that doesn't exist.
That is the absolute crux of the modern water debate. You have
FR.
perfectly articulated the dividing line.
Oh, thanks.
Historically, because of the costs we just outlined, desalination has always been viewed by policymakers as a last resort. You only build it when the reservoir is truly empty.
Right.
But because of severe, prolonged climate-driven droughts and because the technology prices have fallen to that 41-cent mark, it is rapidly transitioning from a last resort to a primary resort for affluent coastal areas.
Because they can afford it.
Right. They are choosing the security of an unlimited supply over the austerity of conservation. But notice, I specifically said coastal areas.
Yes, of course.
Because there is another massive hidden cost in the ledger that completely changes the math for the rest of the world. Transport.
Yes, the transport factor. When I was looking through the data, this specific point absolutely blew my mind. I read a study from 2005 that laid out the brutal physics of moving water around.
It's heavier than people think.
We take for granted that water just flows out of our taps, but water is incredibly heavy. 1 cubic meter of water weighs exactly 1 metric ton.
Right. And moving millions of tons of anything requires massive infrastructure and massive energy. That 2005 study presented a stark equivalency.
Okay, let's hear it.
Lifting water 2,000 meters in elevation, say, pumping it up a mountain range, or transporting it horizontally over a flat distance of 1,600 kilometers costs about the exact same amount of energy as desalinating it from the ocean in the first place.
That is a staggering statistic. Let me just wrap my head around that.
It's intense.
So for a coastal city like San Diego or Barcelona or Sydney, desalination makes perfect economic sense. The ocean is right there. Your customers are right there.
Right.
But for an inland city or a high-elevation city like Mexico City or Harar in Zimbabwe or a place deep in the American Midwest, desalination is a financially brutal proposition.
It really is.
You are paying a premium to chemically manufacture the water on the coast, and then you have to pay that exact same massive energy bill a second time just to physically push it up the mountains to where the people actually live.
Exactly. The geography dictates the economics. Now, there are extremely wealthy nations that simply ignore that cost. Saudi Arabia does exactly this.
Oh, right.
They desalinate millions of gallons of water at massive plants in Jubail, right on the coast of the Persian Gulf, and then they use massive pipeline networks to pump that water 320 kilometers deep inland to their capital city of Riyadh.
Wow.
They pay the manufacturing tax and the transport tax because they have the domestic energy resources to do so.
And Israel is taking the concept a step further.
They are. They aren't just pumping it to cities. They are now using desalinated water to actively pump backwards into natural environments. They are replenishing the Sea of Galilee with manufactured water.
So they are essentially refilling nature
Yeah.
mechanically.
Yes.
Okay, but for the nations that don't have endless oil wealth, how do they cheat the system? How do they make these massive operations economically viable?
They use a financial and thermodynamic hack called cogeneration.
Cogeneration, okay.
Remember earlier when we talked about co-locating with power plants to dilute the brine? It goes deeper than that. Power plants generate electricity by spinning turbines with steam, and they produce a massive amount of waste heat that would otherwise just be vented into the atmosphere and lost forever.
Right.
In a cogeneration setup, the desalination plant captures that waste heat from the power plant and uses it to drive the thermal distillation process for free.
Well, that's brilliant.
Or, if it's a membrane plant, they share the electrical infrastructure to reduce overhead. Sometimes they use a hybrid approach.
How does the hybrid work?
They mix the incredibly pure, almost mineral-free distillate from a thermal plant with the slightly less pure permeate from a reverse osmosis plant to perfectly optimize the quality and the cost of the final product.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. We have costs that are falling,
Yeah.
but still heavily tied to the volatile energy market. We have a massive, unavoidable energy footprint to run the pumps.
Yeah.
And we have a heavy, localized environmental toll with the hypersaline brine suffocation. Knowing all of this, the global scientific community is not resting on its laurels.
No, they are working incredibly hard.
They are rushing to reinvent the entire concept from the ground up.
Which brings us to our final segment, the bleeding edge. We are looking at future tech and some truly weird side effects of solving this problem. Let's look at the wild experiments happening right now to bypass the energy grid entirely.
If the ultimate goal is to completely decouple our water supply from fossil fuels, which currently power 95% of all desalination in the Middle East,
Right.
you have to look at renewable energy.
But engineers are looking far beyond just slapping some solar panels onto the roof of a traditional reverse osmosis plant. They're looking at direct mechanical power, wave-powered systems, for example.
Yes, I was looking at companies like Cedo and Anika. They are deploying these giant offshore buoys. And what's brilliant is that instead of using the up and down kinetic motion of the ocean waves to generate electricity, sending that electricity to shore and then using it to power a pump.
Which loses energy at every step.
Right, exactly. They cut out the middleman entirely. They use the mechanical wave motion to directly actuate hydraulic pumps inside the buoy. They use the ocean's own raw kinetic energy to push the seawater directly through the reverse osmosis membranes right there in the water. You skip the electrical conversion entirely.
It is a beautiful, elegant use of physics. And taking that concept of utilizing the ocean's own physical properties a step further, researchers are currently developing deep-sea reverse osmosis, or DSRO.
Wait, put a plant underwater.
Exactly. Think about the energy problem. Standard RO requires massive pumps to generate the immense pressure needed to force water through the membranes.
The snowplow.
Right, the snowplow. But the ocean is naturally incredibly pressurized at depth. So instead of building a billion-dollar concrete plant on the shore and running giant electrical pumps, you install the membrane equipment deep on the seabed.
Oh, wow.
You use the ocean's natural crushing hydrostatic pressure, the sheer weight of the water column above the equipment to passively force the water through the membranes.
It's brilliant. Use the ocean's weight against itself. You let gravity do the work of the snowplow.
Exactly. And the preliminary studies suggest that by utilizing this natural hydrostatic pressure, DSRO could boost the energy efficiency of the process by up to 50% compared to standard land-based RO plants.
And it's a massive leap. But the innovation isn't just happening at a massive industrial scale. Some of the most exciting technology I saw is actually focused on shrinking the entire process down.
Oh, the MIT project.
Yes. In 2022, researchers at MIT developed a portable, filterless desalination unit that literally fits in a suitcase. It weighs under 10 kilograms.
And the technology inside that 10-kilogram suitcase is a genuine leap forward because it abandons reverse osmosis entirely.
Oh, really?
Yes. It doesn't use standard physical filters that require high pressure pumps and constant chemical cleaning to prevent fouling. Instead, it uses a process called ion concentration polarization, followed by electrodialysis.
Okay, ion concentration polarization. You're going to have to give me another ELI 5 on that one.
Yeah.
How does an electrical field pull salt out of water?
Let's visualize it. Imagine the salty water flowing through a narrow channel inside the suitcase. On either side of this channel, the device applies a specific electrical field.
Okay.
Now remember that salt dissolved in water isn't just floating rocks, it breaks down into charged particles, or ions positively charged sodium and negatively charged chloride. The electrical field acts like a powerful magnet. As the water flows past, the electrical field violently pulls the positively charged salt ions to one side and the negatively charged ions to the other side.
Wow, so it separates them.
It magnetically rips the salt out of the mainstream of water, diverting the concentrated brine into a waste channel while the newly purified water continues straight through. It even repels suspended solids and bacteria.
That is incredible. So it's literally dragging the salt away magnetically as the water flows by. And because it doesn't need high-pressure mechanical pumps to shove water through a microscopic sponge, the energy requirement is almost non-existent.
Very low.
The numbers on this are crazy. It only uses 20 watt-hours per liter.
Yeah.
You can run the entire suitcase off a single, small, portable solar panel that you can carry under your arm.
And it's user-friendly, too.
Yeah. It's fully automated. You drop a hose in the ocean, push a single button, and an app on your phone tells you when the water is safe to drink.
It is a remarkable achievement. Now, the limitation right now is the production rate. It only makes about 1/3 of a liter per minute, and the advanced materials required to build those electrical channels are still expensive. But the proof of concept is revolutionary.
It really is. Think about the applications. Think about disaster relief when a hurricane knocks out the power grid and the municipal water supply.
It would save lives.
Exactly. Think about military operations or remote coastal villages in developing nations. You completely remove the need for massive grid-tied infrastructure. Individuals can literally carry a solar-powered water factory into a disaster zone in a suitcase.
It democratizes the technology, and just this past April, in 2024, researchers published results on yet another breakthrough that operates on a completely different physical principle: thermophoresis, or thermodiffusive desalination.
Okay, this one sounds like pure science fiction to me. Passing water through a temperature gradient. How does temperature move salt?
It relies on a very complex, yet entirely natural physical phenomenon where particles suspended in a fluid will automatically migrate when subjected to a temperature gradient.
Okay, make it make sense.
By passing saline water through a microscopic channel that is exposed to a very specific temperature difference orthogonal to the flow, meaning one side of the channel is hot and the other is cold, the thermal energy dynamics force the salt ions to naturally migrate away from the pure water toward the cooler side.
So the salt essentially runs away from the heat.
Simply put, yes. In laboratory settings, they've already shown they can achieve significant concentration drops using this method.
That's wild.
But the real excitement around thermophoresis isn't just making drinking water, it's what it can do with the waste. Because this method is highly effective for treating already concentrated hypersaline brine, it could actually be the technological key to achieving what the industry calls zero liquid discharge.
Zero liquid discharge, meaning we extract literally all the water from the brine and are left only with dry, solid blocks of salt and mineral. If we can achieve that economically, we completely eliminate the toxic brine plumes suffocating the seafloor that we discussed earlier. We solve the biggest environmental hurdle of the entire industry.
Precisely. The goal is a closed-loop system with zero environmental outflow. But speaking of hurdles, as we rapidly scale up our reliance on artificially manufactured water, we have to talk about a really weird, deeply unexpected side effect of solving the water crisis.
This health quirk.
Yes, the health quirk. Desalination, especially reverse osmosis, is incredibly effective. In fact, it is too effective.
Too effective.
It strips out everything, including essential trace minerals that the human body requires, like dietary iodine.
This is such a classic human story. We build this miraculous machine to solve our biggest problem, and in doing so, we accidentally create a completely new, invisible problem. I saw this study on this from Israel.
The National Survey.
Yes. Israeli researchers noticed a strange public health trend and conducted a massive national survey. They found a shockingly high burden of iodine deficiency in the general population. We're talking about 62% of school-aged children and 85% of pregnant women testing below the World Health Organization's adequacy range for iodine,
And the direct link to this deficiency was the water coming out of their taps.
because they rely so heavily on desalination.
Yes, Israel is a global leader in this technology. They rely on desalinated seawater for up to 80% of their domestic and industrial water supply.
Wow, 80%.
Now, historically, humans got a large portion of their dietary iodine from natural groundwater and rivers. But because reverse osmosis strips the water down to essentially pure H2O, and because Israel lacked a universal salt iodization program in their food supply to compensate, the population was simply not getting enough of this vital nutrient.
And iodine is critical for thyroid function and cognitive development.
Exactly. This technological triumph inadvertently led to increased reports of thyroid issues, requiring the government to develop entirely new public health strategies to manually remineralize the manufactured water or mandate supplements in the food supply.
It's fascinating. We get so busy conquering nature with our giant plants and high-pressure pumps that we forget we are fundamentally a part of nature. We need the trace minerals the Earth provides.
We can't escape our biology.
Which is exactly why I think some of the most cutting-edge research happening right now isn't looking at adding more mechanical pressure, but is actually looking backwards at nature for the answers. Biomimesis, looking at how millions of years of evolution have already solved the desalination problem.
Evolution is the ultimate engineer. It has provided brilliant blueprints. Seabirds, for instance.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
Right. Pelicans, albatrosses, gulls, they spend their entire lives flying over the open ocean without any access to fresh water. Yet they survive. They have a highly specialized gland located just above their beak that operates on a countercurrent exchange system.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's called a rete mirabile, a complex network of blood vessels. When they drink seawater, this gland essentially distills it, extracting the pure water for their bodies and concentrating the salt into a hypersaline brine. And then the bird literally just sneezes out the pure concentrated salt.
A seabird sneeze. It is nature's own zero liquid discharge system. And it's not just birds. Mangrove trees do something remarkably similar, right?
They do.
They grow directly in coastal seawater. Their roots are constantly submerged in salt. But they have specialized glands on their leaves that excrete salt crystals. The pure water stays in the tree, and the solid salt forms on the surface of the leaf, which eventually just falls off into the wind.
It's a perfect system.
If human engineers can map and mimic the atomic structure of a mangrove leaf or a pelican's nasal gland in our synthetic membranes, we could theoretically desalinate water with near-perfect energy efficiency, entirely passively.
And that biological mimicry raises an incredibly important question about the ultimate future of human habitation on this planet.
Where is all this heading?
As we transition away from massive fossil fuel-powered thermal plants and move toward decentralized, solar-powered, AI-optimized biomimetic membrane systems, we are charting a course toward a zero-carbon, theoretically limitless, freshwater supply.
And if we achieve that, it completely rewrites the rules of human civilization.
It really does.
Let's recap this incredible journey we've been on. We started thousands of years ago with Aristotle staring at a waxy cup in 350 BC, desperately trying to filter the sea drop by drop. We moved through the desperate steam-powered survival of soldiers in the 1500s and 1800s.
A lot of trial and error.
We saw the breakthrough of the microscopic snowplows and the reverse osmosis revolution that brought the energy costs crashing down. We confronted the heavy, toxic reality of hypersaline brine plumes suffocating the seafloor, and we debated the stark economic tightrope of manufacturing water versus conserving it.
The ledger.
Right, the ledger. And now, we're looking forward to a bleeding-edge future of floating, wave-powered water factories and personal solar suitcases that can bring life to a disaster zone.
It truly is a profound technological triumph of the human mind. But as we've seen with the brine, the energy costs, and the health quirks, it is a triumph that demands constant environmental and ethical oversight. We cannot simply engineer our way out of consequences.
We can't. Which brings us to a final provocative thought that I want to leave you with.
Yeah.
When you look at all the data we've discussed today, one fact stands out above the rest. Desalination, along with advanced wastewater recycling, is the only water resource on the planet that is entirely 100% independent of rainfall.
It's the only one.
Now think about human history. For all of recorded time, our greatest cities, London, Cairo, New York, Paris, Baghdad, they were all built exactly where nature provided fresh water. They were built on rivers, massive lakes, or deep aquifers. For thousands of years, geography was destiny.
But if renewable energy allows us to manufacture unlimited fresh water on literally any coastline, completely independent of the climate, independent of the rain.
Exactly. Does this mean the maps of the future will be completely redrawn? Will we see the rise of entirely new massive megacities thriving in coastal deserts that are currently completely uninhabitable? Imagine the stranded mariner from our opening scenario, dying of thirst on a life raft in the blazing sun. Only now, his boat has a flexible solar panel, a microscopic biomimetic membrane, and the infinite terrifying sea beneath him is no longer a desert. It is a well.
A very deep well.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you turn on your tap to boil some pasta or take a shower, take just 1 second to think about the incredible physics, the thousands of years of history, and the bleeding-edge future that is flowing right out of it.